Hey guys, Alicia is here. Welcome to my channel. We are here in Central Park on this beautiful September afternoon with my good friend Masha.
Hi everyone.
She's a real estate agent here in New York City, and today we're gonna talk about how to find a rental apartment in New York City, all the tips and tricks. I'm gonna share from my New Yorker experience. I've been living in New York for the past 5.5 years, and Masha gonna share with her professional experience. So I hope that you guys enjoy it, and without further ado, let's dive in. So the first thing we want to point out that a lot of people actually think that there is only Manhattan in New York City because, you know, all of the movies and books, but there is actually more to it. There is 5 different boroughs, and I'm actually going to share my perspective because for the past 5 years I've been living in Queens, and Masha actually is a Brooklyn resident, so she's going to share her outlook, and we're going to share why we love those boroughs. So let me begin by saying why I love Queens. So where I live is about an hour drive from, an hour commute from Manhattan by train. And I live in a very green area, and you actually cannot tell that it's really New York City because how green and quiet it is, but there are also some stores and some little small businesses, so it's like very family oriented, very family friendly. So I think the biggest thing I love about Queens is just how multicultural and international it is, because you have restaurants and shops from all around the world. Like just where I live in my neighborhood, we have Thai, Chinese restaurants, Indian cuisine, we have a Japanese store. So it's really cool because it's very diverse, and you can literally find anything. What attracts you in Brooklyn, Masha?
Yeah, I mean, everything you just said is, I think, applicable to Brooklyn and Queens, and in some cases the Bronx and Staten Island as well. I mean, I think once you get out of Manhattan, you kind of get into the real New York in a good way. You know, we chose to live in Brooklyn. We live in Williamsburg, which is right across the river from Manhattan. And I have to agree, like the people, there's such a diverse group of people. You meet people from all over the world, different restaurants, different bars. My neighborhood is actually very concentrated, so we do have a lot of residents living there. So you do feel like you live in a city, but you don't feel like you're living around skyscrapers, right? So it's a little bit of a different vibe than if you were to live in a neighborhood in Manhattan, but equally as lively, just as many things to do. And I think that a lot of people don't really understand that if you move out to a borough like Brooklyn or Queens, you're really getting kind of all the same benefits as you are if you were living in Manhattan, because many of the neighborhoods, especially recently, have become kind of the cultural hubs of those boroughs. So I think it's definitely worth exploring.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that, and I think you can kind of get a bang for your buck because you can afford much larger space versus Manhattan, and I just think it's totally different experience. Like for me, I love to be in the city, I love to work in the city, but I think when I get home, it's still busy, but it's definitely quieter, and I kind of want to escape from that hustle and bustle of big city sometimes. So I think living, you know, in somewhat residential areas can be beneficial if you are into that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, no matter if you live in Manhattan, Brooklyn, or Queens, it's all about what you want in a neighborhood, you know?
Yeah.
And about how much you're willing to pay for it. You can find a nice residential neighborhood in Manhattan, but you can find one that's equally as nice in Queens and pay much less for it, right? So it's all about kind of setting your expectations for yourself and what it is that you're looking for, and sticking to those expectations.
Yeah. And now finally, let's get to nitty-gritty of how to actually look for apartment, what are the resources. So let's hear from the experts here. Masha, what would you recommend when, you know, where to look for apartment?
Sure, absolutely. So I would say before you begin to look where for an apartment, first decide what is going to be the most important thing for you, because as we just discussed earlier, you have a certain set of criteria and you're not going to get everything, so just decide what thing you're not going to give up, and then also decide how long you have to look for an apartment. So we recommend starting to look for an apartment about a month in advance, a month and a half in some cases, but really start looking a month in advance to make sure you can find the right place and fill out the application, get approved, and move in. So there's plenty of resources to look for apartments. One of the biggest apartment sites in New York City is called Street Easy. They're owned by Zillow, so that'll have one of the most robust lists of apartments available in New York City, but sometimes it doesn't have everything. So that's when you can turn to a real estate broker who can really tell you about apartments that aren't online. A lot of brokers work with landlords in specific buildings where lists are shared of new availabilities that come up every day that maybe aren't posted on StreetEasy or other websites. And so a broker can really help you narrow down and find something that not a lot of other people are looking at, right? So you can get into an exclusive property. And I mean, honestly, it's kind of it's kind of a serendipitous situation sometimes. So if there's an apartment you like, go to it, talk to the broker there. They may have another apartment that's coming up on the market that they haven't made.
So now the most important question is how to actually look for apartments. So what would be the process?
Sure. Well, before you start looking for any apartment online or physically, I would make a list of the criteria that is most important to you. You're in New York City, so you're probably not going to find everything on your list unless you're willing to spend $10,000 a month for it, right? So make a list of your priorities. What are things you really can't do without, right? And so that will kind of be your guiding resource when you start looking. Then I would start on a website called StreetEasy, which is one of the biggest rental websites here in New York City, and it has quite a few apartments for rent there. But also there's some things that aren't on StreetEasy, right? So that's when it would be really beneficial to talk to a real estate broker, because oftentimes they have relationships with landlords that send out availability lists for their buildings on a daily basis that they might not post online, or they might not post all the units online, right? And so your broker can really tell you what's coming up on the market, get you into places that are a little bit exclusive, so you don't have as much competition. Another way to kind of find something that may not be online is if you do find an apartment through StreetEasy and you go to view it, make sure you're talking to that broker. Ask them if there's anything else that they have on the market, right? Oftentimes they will, or they'll know somebody that does, and they can get you in before it's actually listed publicly, which is another great way to get into an apartment without having to fight it out with everybody else, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, besides StreetEasy, there is like plenty of other sources. I think like apartments.com, on top of my head. I mean, some people actually, I have a couple of friends who found their apartments on Craigslist, which is sort of like a classified website, which is not necessarily safe. So it's kind of, you take your own risk because there is a lot of scammers out there. But I think, once you start looking for apartment, know your sources, and if you don't want to risk it, definitely reach out to broker, because it can definitely help you out with your apartment search, and especially if you have like a very specific list of needs.
Yeah, sure. And also especially if you know exactly what you want and you kind of know the neighborhood, you know the price point, you know everything, it's not hard to find an apartment here in New York. You have to be diligent and you have to look for it. But if you're kind of new to the area, or you're just not sure kind of what you're looking for, what it is that you really need, a broker can really help you out with that and give you a very curated list of apartments. And that way you don't need to be on StreetEasy or whatever website you're using, for 4 hours a day trying to coordinate your schedule. They'll do all that for you. You don't need to, it's kind of, you just have to show up.
Right. Yeah. So now let's talk what actually happens when you find an apartment you really, really desire. What are the ways how you get it? Like, you found it, now what?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So most apartments require an application. And actually, before we get into that, one of the things about renting in New York City is you want to understand whether your apartment is a fee or no fee apartment. And essentially what that means is if it's a fee apartment, that means that the tenant is responsible for paying the commission of the broker. And that's whether you had been working with that broker or you found an apartment that was listed by a broker. Usually when it says that it's a fee apartment, it's your responsibility to pay for it. And it's 15% of the yearly rent. It can be up to that. Or it can be as little as 1 month's rent, but that's really negotiable between you and that specific scenario. But something to keep in mind. And then in a no fee situation, it means that the landlord has already taken care of the broker commission, so you don't actually owe that commission. However, something to keep in mind is that oftentimes the price in a no fee apartment, the price of the commission is built into the rent, so you actually may end up paying the same or more, though maybe not just all at once in the beginning. So just something to keep in mind on how that money is actually allocated. But so you found the apartment, congratulations. So most apartments will require an application process. So you'll apply to either the building or through the broker or whatever your situation is, and you have to provide certain documents. So varies building by building, but most of the common ones are your identification, your W-2s, a verification from your employer stating that you work at the company. Most apartments in New York City require that you make 40 times the rent of your guaranteed income, so that doesn't include any sort of commissions or anything like that, like your base salary. And that can be, if you're moving with a partner or a friend, that would be both of you combined. But that's something to keep in mind as well. So even if you may be able to afford the apartment, you want to make sure that you are actually making 40 times the rent on that. So they'll just verify your credentials, that you say who you are, that your credit checks out. You will need to do a credit check that's legally required by New York State. And once you have been approved for the apartment, then you'll go ahead and actually sign the lease and start making it official that you're going to be moving into this apartment. And this varies, the process in terms of how long it takes varies greatly. We won't go into too much detail, but if you're renting in an apartment building, specifically where it's all rentals, the process is fairly quick, especially if it's a pretty standard building that does a lot, that has a lot of turnover. If it's a condo building or a co-op building, which means that you're kind of renting from a person that owns that unit, that process may take a little bit longer, and you may need to be approved by the building as well. And that's something that you should definitely talk to your broker about, that you're working with, who can help you guide through that process.
And then in terms of lease, so I know that there is usually 2 years lease, but is there like any variations for that?
Yeah, usually it's a 12-month lease is fairly standard. A lot of people are doing 2-year leases, especially now with the COVID situation. You may get a break on your rent, but it would be for 2 years, right? And so the other thing to remember is the money you owe up front. So you, in New York City, it's actually the only thing you will ever legally owe to sign your lease is your first month's rent, and then the first month's deposit. So the deposit's equal to first month's rent. Okay. Because the laws have recently changed, you won't be actually charged for anything else. And then, of course, a broker's fee, but that's dependable on your situation.
Cool. Thank you for explaining.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think now in terms of COVID, definitely the whole real estate scene completely changed. What do you think is the biggest change? Like, how did it impact real estate market at the moment in the past, I would say, 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, just speaking for rentals specifically, we've had a lot of people and their lease and not renew, right? So there are quite a few vacancies in the city right now, but that's a good thing for you if you're trying to move to the city, because prices have gone significantly down. So now's the time to get that apartment in Manhattan that maybe you couldn't have gotten, 2 years ago at a price that's a little bit more reasonable, right? And so that's just definitely something to watch out for. Also, a lot of apartments are no fee now, like I said before, meaning that you will not be responsible for paying the commission of the broker, which is another, something to consider, so you don't have to pay that up front. So look for those deals. A lot of people are doing 1 month free, or on a 13-month lease. A lot of people are giving other discounts. So just make sure you're keeping an eye for all of those discounts. And honestly, if you want to offer something less and negotiate, now's the time to do that, because people are trying to fill in vacancies. Yeah. It's a good time to, get it at a better price, right? Even if it may not be listed for it. So go for it.
Would you say that there are like any particular areas in the city where prices drop significantly?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely where you notice it the most is Manhattan. And I won't list specific neighborhoods because it definitely varies on the type of apartment you're getting. But for example, in Gramercy, an apartment, a 1-bedroom that may have cost you $2,800, a couple years ago, now you can get for $2,500, right? So that's, it's not gonna be the biggest change, but $300 is a big change for an apartment. So it's definitely things like that. It's, if you've been thinking about renting something, but you just weren't sure if it was in your price point, now's the time to look through those. And especially, for some of these neighborhoods that are super desirable, there are always gems to be had. You may need to, if you're okay living in a walk-up, but in Greenwich Village, you know, you could find that amazing apartment for a lesser price.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, that's what I noticed as well. I also noticed that a lot of people, you know, run away from the city and they move in upstate, Long Island. So definitely those like very suburban areas, I feel like they actually hiked up in price. So I think right now, if you want to like score a good bargain, I think the closer you look to the city or to the crowded places, the better deal you probably can find, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, you know, in places like Brooklyn and Queens, where before it would have been, you know, cheaper to live there, and the prices are still lower.
Right.
But people are going there because in Brooklyn you can get a backyard or a nice outdoor space, right, where you may not be able to do that in Manhattan. So it's just all about your priorities and kind of what you, you know, what you need for your lifestyle right now.
Yeah, for sure. I guess let's touch upon a little bit like what actually to look in apartment. Because for me personally, I think when I look for apartment, on top of, you know, size on maybe like every little thing I have on my list, but I think what's really important is how it's close to the commute. And a lot of people don't really think about it. They're like, well, you know, we'll see how it's gonna work out. But I think for me personally, it has to be approachable either by subway or bus. Is there like anything else you would advise to look for in an apartment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, commute I think is important. Make sure you know the train lines. Even if you live a block away from the train, but it's the wrong train, that's not going to help you, right? So just make sure you're aware that that's the right place, that's the right commute for you. Another thing is grocery stores, right? You want to ask and make sure that your grocery store is walkable, because otherwise you're going to have to figure out some sort of food delivery, or you're going to have to Uber there, which, you know, may be fine, but that's just something definitely to consider. You know, make sure you confirm the pet policy always, because you don't want to run into a situation where you can't bring your dog or your cat or whatever. Make sure you confirm the laundry in the building. I would check out the laundry, like if it's in the basement, ask if it's a coin or a card. Just make sure that everything's kind of functioning down there correctly. What else? I mean, just make sure that it's, you know, it's in a clean and nice condition. I mean, you know, in New York, obviously you're going to find apartments that are older, but you still want to make sure that they're well maintained, right? You want to make sure that all the appliances are functional, unless stated that they're not, right? And just that, you know, it's going to be livable for you. Make sure that the light